Welcome, everybody. Thank you to be here. I'm very proud to be the one who can moderate this discussion about Indonesia. Indonesia has been to the radar since a few years now. I had the chance to go first to Jakarta and Yogyakarta in 2010 to prepare an exhibition about Indonesia that we did also with the help of ELISABETH INANDIAK, who's a writer, a famous writer. It was in 2010, I guess. And I visit also the collection of Dr. Wee, who just started to open his house as a museum. And maybe my first question will be to you, Doctor, and said, how did you start the collection, and how everything started, and how did you create this collection? What I said is like maybe the metropolitan of Indonesia.
Thank you, Hervé. It's for me an honor to be here. I have done a lot of talks, but it's for the first time I have the chance to talk in Paris. Yeah, Paris is so important in the art history. And yeah, I still remember when Hervé came, it was a long time ago, and I showed him the two buildings. I already had two buildings. But in the meantime, we already had another building, a third, that was open officially for public and has temporary exhibitions. And the third building is this, and this was an ex-tobacco warehouse. Yeah, that is the front side, the facade, biggest work by Endang Wiharso. I think this artist is promoted here in Europe by Arn. Yeah? He has sold a lot of his work. And this is the inner garden where the entrance is. Yeah. And this is the gallery inside. This is the current exhibition. And yeah, we will talk later about this. But actually, I just want to tell you, if we talk about Indonesia now, for those who still don't know much about Indonesia, I want to emphasize that Indonesia consists of more than 17,000 islands. And if we talk about Indonesia now in terms of art, we talk only about one island. And this is the smallest of the 5 major islands. Maybe 2 islands. The other one is Bali, which was in the past more well known than Java. But at this moment, in terms of contemporary art, is now surpassed totally by Java. And even in Java, we only will talk about 2 cities maybe, Yogyakarta and Bandung, where Tintin came from. Maybe Jakarta. So, and the people who has ever been in touch with contemporary art, from the 250 million people, is I think less than 1 per year. Yeah. So you can see the big potential if the economy grows, if the development of art is good. If you have an increase of only 1%, a lot of opportunity for art. So that's why I built a museum, because we don't have infrastructure. We have many good artists, but the infrastructure is very minimal. And usually you go to a country, if you want to see the art, the artistry, there is a state museum. We don't have. The best collections are in the hands of the collectors. And most of the collectors, they are not keen to show their work to the public. So someone should start. And I started with all shortcomings, of course, with all this, but I think with the time, with the experience we get, we will learn a lot. And until now, it is, I think, very delighting to have this museum. And if you talk about Indonesian art until today, I think it's still very much related with religiosity, with the gods. Yeah? Not only one god, but a lot of gods, because Indonesia has about 250 million inhabitants, 90% is Muslim, but Indonesia is not a Muslim country at all. Every time I show the works, Indonesian work like this, the contemporary, people are surprised. Usually they have an idea that Indonesian art is like Islamic art. It's not at all. That's why we have to socialize this kind of work. It has still to do with spirituality, because the link of the people with the religiosity, with the cause in Indonesia, has never been broken like in the West. So the work there is by an artist whose name is Albert Jonathan, a young artist from Bandung. He's now studying in Kyoto for ceramic art. And that is a mandala. Mandala came from Hinduism. It has to do with spiritualism. Yeah. And of course, because this religious context, Indonesian art until now is also still very moralistic. They always had about the good and the bad, yeah. And while most issues nowadays are mostly in the gray area. Yeah? We have here another work by Angki Purbanono, who was a pioneer of art photography in Indonesia, but he always showed the photography in neon boxes. These works are slides he found on the flea market in Hong Kong with very old pictures. But some of the pictures he replaced with photos he made from the young ladies walking on the street with very small shots. He took it from behind. He didn't have the courage to take it from front, I think. But you know, he just want to show that this kind of photos of this kind of dress is Indonesia maybe not yet tolerated. It's again very moralistic. So I think in this contemporary era, in that sense, Indonesia has not moved far. Yeah, this, of course, the modern and the contemporary, we cannot have the current or the contemporary without the modern. So these artists differ maybe 60 years from age. That is Afandi, one of our most important or well-known artists. He was already in Paris, in Europe, in the early 50s. And he participated, this painting he did in 53 in Paris, and with this painting he participated in the Venice Biennial in 54. He was invited with at the time the curator Rodolfo Palluccini, who saw his works in the Sao Paulo Biennale in 53. And he got a second prize at the time. The president, curator, talked about his works, that it's a mix of Oriental calligraphy and Western expressionism, like that. And he compared with Fujita, who was still remaining Japanese. So if he had stayed in Europe, maybe he has a bigger name already now. And this is Nasirun, who is now for 50 years, still very much a painter, although he is also doing installation art. But if you compare, yeah, of course, he is actually much older, but it looks even more Western than this younger artist. You expect this will be more Western, But that is the uniqueness of Indonesia. Actually the spiritualism and the religiosity is still deep in their roots, and it is a mix of all kinds of religions. That's why Nasirun's works also have great success when he exhibited in Japan, because the Japanese, they like also those kind of works.
And also mythology is a
Yes.
really large issue in
Yeah.
in Indonesia. Maybe Elizabeth, you can talk a little bit about that, because you wrote a book a decade ago about.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, this is working.
Yes, Elizabeth, you
What
wrote.
should I start with? I very much agree with Dr. Wee about all what he said, of course, because he's an expert. I'm not an expert, but I lived for so many years in Indonesia as a writer. And what I see, there's just a connection between, the link between arts and spirituality, but we discussed it last year together. Also the link between urbanity and villages, yeah, or agriculture and culture, yeah. The link is not broken. It's very strong. So the artists are still very inspired, but not only inspired by village culture, traditional culture, but they are connected. They do many exhibitions in villages, they work with villagers, back and forth. And I think this is a very important power, strength. And also, of course, you have the mythology. Mythology is still linked with art, but with politics also. In Indonesia, you always talk in terms of politics, like our nowadays president, yeah, Joko Widodo, is maybe the Petrok, yeah, the figure of one of the 4 clowns of Indonesian puppet show. And you have always this link with the mythology, spirituality, agriculture, yeah, culture, politics. It's a holistic society still, yeah, or how will you call it? And I think that's why modern art in Indonesia can be very contemporary, but also not disconnected with its roots.
I'm thinking about Eredono, that you know well, that using a lot of mythology in his work in a political way, because he started his work before the change of the government.
Yes, he was a son, his father was in the military. Like many artists or many, they were connected with the dictatorship and they suffered, and maybe art was a way to escape or to express something different. And of course, Eredono expressed a lot of mythology in his art, but he has a wonderful idea. I can share it to you today. I hope he doesn't mind that I share it, but about all these islands, yeah, as you described, there are so many islands. In fact, the motto in Frankfurt Fair was 17,000 islands, but the right number is 13,466 registered island in the United Nations.
You were part of that. You can't.
No. I was part of an expedition with the Minister of the Sea and the Oceans and the Sea some years ago, and they had the charge to count all the islands and name them. And then, because an island without name cannot be counted as an island, so they counted and named the island that were not named, about 8,000 of them.
What is
so the final count, that is registered at the United Nations is 13,466. So maybe in the meantime, a few islands have appeared, because in Indonesia nothing is permanent, yeah, especially about the land. Some island disappear and appears. So Eredono had this wonderful idea. Indonesia now has a very amazing minister for the fishing and the sea. She's a woman, Bu Susi, and she catched all the illegal boats that are fishing in the Indonesian waters from Thailand, from many countries, and she blew them up, yeah. And the idea was to ask her to save one and to use it as a school of art or museum that will go sail from one island to connect all the island with arts. What do you think? We should give her this advice and find sponsors for that, so all the islands of Indonesia can be connected with arts. You know, the artist can really, or what do you think? Tintin, that's a good idea.
Dr. Ui's fund can go to there.
A sailing museum.
Yes, yes. That might be the next step, yeah.
I think this idea of moving territories on borders also is something important for you, Tintin, as an artist and as a representation of the new generation. So maybe we can see some of the images of your work. Because in 2011...
It's the last one.
Yeah, that's the... yeah.
And I think we can just let it run in the background while I talk, because it's a lot of images and that I just compile for generic use. But thank you, Hervé. Thank you, Alexandra, Asia Now Paris, to invite me here. And if I may, I would like to acknowledge as well Slade School of Fine Art, in which I'm doing, well, I'm an artist in residence for 6 weeks there until the 6th of November. And that's how I could respond so quickly to this invitation. We heard about Indonesia a little bit from Dr. Wee, Hervé, and Elisabeth. Dr. Wee, I'm actually not from Bandung. I studied architecture in Bandung. But
Everything. You're a musician, you're architecture, you're an artist.
But I'm actually from Bali. Oh. And so, yeah, I guess the theme of being not at the center of everything is always, you know, well, I'm not in Paris. Well, I'm in Paris now, but I'm actually in London, you know. So I'm not at the center. But basically, I guess that hangs together with the idea of being Indonesian for me. Well, okay, I also come from Chinese Indonesian background, not at the center, you know, and so I'm always like at somehow the margins. And so the idea of this margin area, the periphery, is really interesting to me. Also, oh yeah, I mean, maybe I should also mention that Bali, aside from being a very beautiful island and very famous since the 30s, I guess in the West, and also, you know, related to some, you know, French composers. In 65, actually, it was, well, known as the site of the biggest killing in Indonesia. And my grandfather was one of them who got missing, basically. He was missing in 65, and of course, under Suharto, until 98, we couldn't talk about it at all. And so I grew up with this secret of, okay, somehow I'm related to 65, but I didn't know how. Because my grandfather was missing in 65, he was never found. And so, and I couldn't talk about it at all. And so that feeling of, you know, like being somehow, what do you call that? Dispensable is always with me. And that, I guess, associated with the feeling of being at the margin, always at the margin. And so I think a lot about borders, basically, and how actually it's a space, it's not a line. It's never a line except for on the maps. And so, but in reality, it's always a space, and there are always people inside the space. And so, and I found from personal experiences as well. I was, for example, refused entry in Frankfurt in 2011. I had the valid visa and everything. And it was really hard, but then at the same time, so the border police were really hard on me, but then there's one single individual who was a border police as well, who helped me, basically got back in. I had to go to Moscow. Well, I was on my way to Moscow as well, and so in Moscow, basically based on the recommendation of this border police who was a bit different, who had a different idea from his colleagues, I managed to apply for another visa, and then so I could enter Frankfurt. But anyway, so basically, people are important, individuals are important, and basically interaction with individuals can change borders. I think that's apparent in a lot of my works. I do a lot of what I call game performances. And basically, in my game performances, I usually set up a situation of the border, using icons from the border, like objects from the border, passports. I did one at a show that Hervé curated in Espace Louis Vuitton a few years ago as well. Basically, it's game performances where individual luck actually is quite crucial. And so, and quite crucial in somehow transforming the border. I do interactive installation as well. I want people to engage with, I want people to be able to touch my work, use my work in a way. And the question of the usefulness of art is also always, you know, like, what is it? What is it? How can I use art? And yeah, and I guess that rings through with a lot of my colleagues in Indonesia as well. Earlier on, we mentioned Angki Purbandono. A little, well, and I hope he doesn't mind as well. A little story about him. He was in prison for some time, and then when he was out, so in prison, basically, he met a lot of prisoners, and he made what is it called? PAP, Prisoner Art Project, or something like this. Program. Ah, I see. Ah, yes. Which, yes, yeah. So, so I guess, you know, like how art can function in social situation is, I think, quite interesting for us and for me. This one, for example, is a cloth vending machine where this was in Moscow, and it was in Moscow biennial. The first weekend of the biennial, the machine broke down because of overuse. So basically, the machine works like you have to put coins in it, and then you can play, and you can win passports. Well, if you're lucky, or if you're skillful, right? And so if you win passport, you don't know which passport it's gonna be, and so you don't know, you never know where your citizenship would be in this game, and basically it was broken because of overuse the first weekend, and the organizer told me that one visitor actually came to them and said, I came here especially to play this to win some passport. I want my money back. So that was really a great compliment. This was a project in Jogja, and basically I converted a local vehicle. Jogja is really the people. Well, I guess the whole of Indonesia. Each little city would have, you know, like this invention somehow. And this vehicle is called odong-odong, and basically, you know, like it's going around and around, and you can pay to ride it, basically. And so what I did was, you can't really see it here, but well, you can see the faces, the happy faces. But basically, what I did was I put pianola roll at the back of the vehicle that activates angklung, which is it's an Indonesian instrument. It's made of bamboo, so basically it's a bamboo organ that rattles to produce the sound. So I make things that can be used, and this is the Melbourne iteration of it at the National Gallery of Victoria. But basically, I wanted to go out, so we arranged this excursion because the project was to make the odong-odong talk to something called Federation Bells. And Federation Bells is, you can see a little bit, not here, but basically it's an instrument that's a public sculpture. and it's made of bells of different pitches, and people can contribute their composition to the bells. But basically, what happens there was so basically I made this. I made the odong dangding talk to the Federation bells. Basically, when you pedal it to the Federation bell side, as we approach, we hear the bells responding to the angklung, playing the same notes. This is the latest stage of recollection of togetherness, my passport project, which I started in 2007, in which I collect images of passports from people I know or from the internet, and then I would make the passport one by one by hand, and basically now I have 150 passports, and I'm still collecting. So if you do want to help me, please send your passports to me. Images of your passports. That's what it looks like. But basically, I arrange them in gradation of colors, but in different. It's quite site-specific in the gallery. Yeah, I respond to the space of the gallery. In this one, it was hung. And this was, you can see a bit of dots in the passport. And basically, in the passport, I put swatted mosquitoes, so they're dead. And, well, of course, the blood is on the next page and stuff. And each mosquito is named. So basically, I put names of people I knew, or, I've names that are interesting to me that I just encountered. So maybe your name is in there. and basically, it's written with pencil. And basically what I say is, everything here is fake. Passport is fake. The mosquito is fake, to tell you the truth. The blood is fake. The names are real. So that's how it was shown in Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven. That was quite early stage of the work. I also, earlier on I talked about my game performances. Actually, and this one is the one that we did with HERVÉ, and it was the Indonesian mythologies at Espace Culture Louis Vuitton. Earlier on I talked about the game performances. I will actually do one of the game performances at the Slade School of Fine Art with the help of the students there as well. And this work was, I made this work for the first time in 2009, and it has been performed. The last time was, actually at one point it was in Art State Singapore, and it attracted 700 people in 3 days. And I actually interact with them one by one. But yeah, the last time was in Sharjah by Nil in the Emirates, and that's where I met the Slade people, and that's where the discussion about the residency started. And you're all invited. If you go to London before the 6th of November, it's going to be there. So this is my latest one, actually. It's baby mosquitoes in a flask, and basically the fish is really beautiful, and it just swims around, and we feed them. We feed the fish. It's quite nice life, I think. And but then some of the baby mosquitoes will escape. So they can escape, and they would go through the nose of the flask, and they can fly out if they're lucky, or if they're skillful. And the whole setup is basically surveilled. So there is a surveillance camera, and then there is a monitor at the back of it. So basically, the surveillance camera captures all the movements and plays it back in time lapse at the monitor. So when you see the setup, you see the camera, you see the fish and the mosquito, and you see the cycle of the fish just going around eating, and the mosquitoes, the baby mosquitoes growing into mosquitoes, maybe escaping or like being eaten, and yeah. So that's called Still Life, and this is an old work, 2008. It's in fashion. It's now in collection of the HERVÉ Art Museum in Shenzhen. It's quite. This is related to. So basically, the razor blade is hung up by the really strong magnet. It's rare earth magnet, and so it's not stable. If you just blow on it, like, then it will fall, and it might cut the string, and the strings actually comes from red pots, pots with red sand on it, and it goes to the other side, and you'll see in the next image. Well, basically, the string goes to these kites, dead kites, I call them, and the kites are made of my family's legal papers, basically, the papers that allow them to legally stay in Indonesia.
There are a lot of flying objects in your...
Flying objects? Really?
Maybe you become very international, and that's one of the key points maybe on our discussion, because I find that in this last few years, Indonesian artists have become really more known and more shown in the Biennale, and especially in Asia as well. And maybe my next question will be for Matthias, because he's the representative of, he's the ambassador, I will say, of Indonesian art, especially in Europe. And how did you start? Is it after a visit in the country? When was that exactly?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because I was thinking all the time, what can I possibly add to this discussion after so much insight already had been given. So my journey to Indonesia and to Southeast Asia started at the same time, I think, as yours, Hervé's, but I went to, it must have been the first Art Stage edition in Singapore, and I came there to this fair, and normally I'm used, I mean, I did hundreds of fairs and so many shows in the past 28 years and so on, so normally I'm used to know everybody, or not everybody, but many people, know works, have my orientation, my bearings, and I came there and I had no clue, no kind of context, nothing to compare to like all this art that I saw, which was mainly Southeast Asian, but also most of it Indonesian contemporary art. And so some people react towards what they don't know, they kind of go away or they close. And if I don't know something, if it challenges me, I open myself and I start to really try to understand. So this was kind of a key moment, initial moment, and then you always have also a mentor or a friend or somebody, a professional that introduces you further. So Jean-Marc de Croop, who was already at the panel this morning, who is working is an expert for Chinese contemporary art, but very knowledgeable in Indonesian contemporary, basically took me by the hand and said, yeah, you really want to see more, let's go there. And so I went to Yogyakarta, I went to Bandung, and basically tried to approach this very, how do you say that, pragmatically in a way, also understanding briefly or rather quickly that understanding quickly, like kind of Indonesia doesn't need me inside Indonesia, they need me outside. So I was, you mentioned already, we saw your work. I mean, you're one of the most internationally exhibiting artists already from Indonesia. But we also spoke about the strength and also about of Indonesian contemporary when you said this community spirit and so on. So I was really intrigued and amazed. But we also spoke about the lack of infrastructure, like kind of public support. It's luckily few private individuals like Dr. Ooi and other private individuals, many collectors that support contemporary art. But there is, like, interestingly, all the work, all the responsibility is on the artist's shoulders. And that reminded me a bit of Berlin, where we started, and I will not make this a long story, but where we started 22 years ago with a gallery, and also we had this great contemporary art growing there because the artists were in Berlin, the necessity of doing something there, but there was no, the public eye was on restoration, reunification, all this stuff. So we were left alone, not supported, and lack of support is always good, makes you creative and so on. But basically, many projects started were artist projects. So I was intrigued by that and came there and said, so what can I do? Not in Indonesia, but outside. And the idea was to bring Indonesian contemporary artists outside. And I don't know what my office sent to you picture-wise, because I was
We have some pictures
on the plane from Sydney here, arriving yesterday morning. So when they sent
Maybe
it,
we
Can we
can
have a
see
quick
them. I
look?
don't know.
I mean, one thing I can already show you, because I mean, as
There
you
are some
already,
pictures from the book.
as you're already here, I'm German, and Germans try to be a bit structured and so on. I realized very soon that when I came, that like kind of there was the Western audience had kind of no clue like me when I arrived, and also no context, didn't know how to contextualize, how to how to localize, put this art. So the first thing or not the first thing, but after the first solo, first a group exhibition, Richard Coe, I don't know if he's still in the room, like he was the expert for Southeast Asia and helped us work together. Jean-Marc de Kroop helped me with the Indonesian part, so the first show we did in Berlin in 2011. And then solo exhibitions by Eko Nugroho, Entang Wiharso followed, but I realized we need to give you and the professionals kind of a tool to put this work into a context, like artists from Indonesia amongst each other, but also in a historical context. So I thought not easy, but let's do this exhibition. ZIP, the title was found. We worked with Enin Supriyanto, also a leading curator within Indonesia, friend of the artist, supporter of many artists. So so ZIP, Indonesian Art Today, was the title, and so we worked on this book, but it took 2 years to bring this together for the very simple reason that, and that's now then the tricky part, that the artists didn't have reproducible materials. The quality of the text that we commissioned was kind of could not be used, for this standard Western context we needed, and so on. So it was a long journey, long way to go, and this is, I think, the last copy I have of that, because of course we didn't publish this as a gallery publication. It was a Distanz Publishers. We wanted this to be an independent project. Also, I had no influence on the selection of the artists, so this was not the artist that I represent. We wanted to give one first overview introduction in this area.
That's interesting that you select this image of Eko Negro, because thanks to you and thanks to Eko went to Paris, we were able to introduce him to the SAM Art project, who select him to make a residency in Paris. And in 2012, I think, he did his solo show at the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. And I think he combined his work, especially the textile work and all his vocabulary coming from Indonesia, into the image that he sourced in Paris. And the combination of both of them was quite interesting.
Yeah, and so if you, for example, like this was the exhibition of Eko Nugroho's in the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne. And so as I said, like the outside look, when we started showing Indonesian art especially, Entang Wiharso, the artist that did this big relief on the outside wall of the OHD Museum, like we didn't run really, we didn't run through open doors. Like we had to kind of really do a lot of educational efforts and put the artists into a context, because for the Western audience, kind of these works looked, or the aesthetic looked a little bit foreign. Maybe we can see another. Yeah, that was the show Asia Looking South that we did together with Richard Coe and with Jean-Marc de Kroop. Here in Agus Suwage here, also leading really major Indonesian contemporary artist, also important position within Yogyakarta in that, because we said it's a very community-driven environment. So Agus was very helpful, like kind of using his infrastructure, his studio, to collect the works together so that we could then send them off to Berlin. To the left, you see Entang Wiharso's work. the first artist basically I signed or I started working with because I found him the most difficult to deal with, but the work kind of spoke because it was the aesthetics. Here you see his solo exhibition that we did in Berlin. Then the aesthetic, only aesthetic-wise, it was so foreign to everything I knew that kind of like I had to really work hard. But the work also, the aesthetic and the works worked in me, and he also speaks about borders in his work, about boundaries that need to be overcome. Just right. Just one, and then I'll stop this. So over 5 years, we have been continuously showing and promoting Indonesian art, and interestingly, I mean, also commercial aspect, when you said 250 million people, and just imagine only 1 promille kind of had been in touch with art, so must be a big market, must be huge potential commercially for Arndt and for many others. Interestingly, and I'm also happy about that because that was my promise and that is also my role, is the within Indonesia, of course, like Hong DJIEN does not need me to buy contemporary Indonesian art. So basically our market had to be, or we had to also enlarge the audience and widen the horizon. And in the past 5 years, we really succeeded to also present and place major works, installations of these artists in German, European collections, even to the United States, New Zealand, and Australia recently, where we work a lot because the Australians only recently realized that their direct neighbors are Indonesia and not the United States of America or Europe. So currently, and that's why you mentioned ambassador, outside or beyond this commercial context, I'm working indeed more in also curated exhibitions, and Frankfurt Kunstverein, the book fair in Frankfurt has the guest country is Indonesia this year, so we helped putting a show exhibition together at the Kunstverein with 5 Indonesian contemporary artists. So it's the journey goes on. There's many challenges and obstacles that you could speak about, but I think that's more an internal discussion here. But because of course, as we said, the lack of infrastructure is and may remain kind of an issue to overcome, because that's what we need.
This is a question I want to ask for everybody. Maybe Laure can answer to that as an expert of South Asian and Indonesian art. I read recently that Bodytech, who's in Indonesia, and opened his museum in China a few years ago, announced that he's going to open a museum soon in Bali, I think. So it's quite interesting that somebody who's coming from Indonesia start to open a museum in China and go back to Indonesia now. So do you have the feeling that things are changing right now in Indonesia, that collectors are more open to do more things or to show their collection, or how do you feel about that?
That, to be honest, I'm not quite sure. I think Asia is a whole different ground in that regard, and the definition of museum is a bit different there. It can involve real estate. It can involve different projects that, thankfully, there is always a place for art and patronage through that. So at least there is an access to art. But for me, actually, what I wanted to do, I think the father, as he's called, the father of contemporary Indonesian art is Dr. Wee. And his initiative is a true initiative because it's really a museum as I think we understand it. It remains for me so far the only one of such a project. I am actually looking forward to seeing what Bodytech's project will be in Bali. I know a bit more about the one in Shanghai. But what I actually wanted to emphasize is there is an ecology there. There is something to cultivate the scene. And that's what I believe is most important and striking to really make it first, to have its longevity, to go beyond the market and really move into art history as well. I think the Indonesian art scene is extremely active. It's extremely creative. But it's also conscious of what it needs to actually remain a growing scene And I think that's what's very important. So my first slide, I'm sorry, it's not the most recent, but it's my favorite. They are actually, so the way I discovered Indonesian art was through Art Jog, which is also an art fair, but it's a fair that is run by the artists, really open to the artists and supported by the galleries. So I think it's a beautiful initiative. This was an installation that was outside the fair the first time I went there. And it's also talking about boundaries and borders and what is the definition of art, contemporary art. This is actually an installation by a puppet theater troupe called Paper Moon. They have performed in many places in the world, and they created this beautiful carousel. Can we please have the next slide? Yeah, you have more details. They did a performance, and this was outside of Art Jog when I first arrived. And I think the initiative of supporting such things that may not have the means to exist without such sponsorship, if you want, from all the galleries and the collectors coming together, supporting Art Jog, there is a real funding from the community. The community is really making sure that those things can actually come to life. The other thing I wanted to talk about, yes, so you have a number of initiatives that are allowing the scene to actually keep growing, to cultivate itself, and to go beyond just the ups and downs of the market. I'm coming from the experience of the gallery and the auction house, and I can tell you it's not necessarily like a longevity line. However, when you have institutions in place such as, well, the fair itself is more related to the market, except this one is a bit different. But you have the Biennale. There is also the one, this year it's a different topic. Can we please have the next slide? But it's really discussing, there is a discussion going on, there is conversation. It's really very lively, and it's really trying to be connected to the world as well as addressing issues. There is a concrete creativity, and there are people that are really involved into promoting and understanding what contemporary art is, and I think it's crucial. The other part that is really important is making sure it's documented. Because, for instance, in China, not everything was documented. And so there are initiatives like this one, which actually is a non-profit. And there is also initiatives that are a bit more private. Can we please have the next slide? But all of them are giving us a good picture. If we really want to follow what's going on and make sure it's documented, which is really crucial, a form of archive, it's really important to be accessible. And that's what, for instance, Forum Sebelang is also a community of artists that are discussing with each other, they're exchanging ideas, but really the core of this is to make sure that people are in conversation instead of working just on their own careers, and they're really fostering like not just their art, but the arts of people around them. For instance, something that is really striking to me, and in comparison to China as well, Sarang is an art space that was opened by Jumaldi Alfi, and he's really there to foster young curators and young artists. So for instance, the basic process is to have, for instance, a very famous artist and a show curated by a young curator that can this way make a name. The building is beautiful too, by the way. And sometimes it's also like very famous curator curating things for young artists. So this way it brings an international platform, it brings international attention. And usually these exhibitions are related either to the Biennale or to Art Jog, but they also happen outside of this. And then finally, this was my closing slide. Thomas is coming from the Guggenheim and from other really knowledgeable background. And he moved his expertise, I would say, from China to Indonesia. And he physically moved there to actually be the director of a museum that will have a lot of beautiful Western works. I think what's crucial as well is that they are open, the entire scene is open to knowledge, to cultivating things. They're open to discovering, and they're not just sealed into their own territory. And I think it really shows how much longevity there could be for it, and how much it can really grow and be a part of art history.
Thank you. And maybe, Dr. Wee, can you tell us a little bit more about your project, the next show that is coming up?
We are having another exhibition next month on the 4th of November. and this exhibition is related with Indonesian history. This year, Indonesia celebrated its 70th anniversary of independence. But besides that, we have also the 60th anniversary of the Asia-Africa Conference, where at the time Sukarno united the non-bloc to be, at the time, was still in the beginning of their sovereignty, yeah, to be one force. But also the tragic event in 1965, the so-called communist coup, like it is still not very clear whether it is coup of the communists. So many victims, like Godfather, like that. So very important event. So I invited two people also to write a book. One is James Bangkat, the very well-known Indonesian artist with international reputation, to write about this history, but from the angle from Indonesia history. But the other is an Indonesian who has been raised since childhood in Holland, Iwan Sewandono, who looked this historical process from the side from the country who colonized us, from Holland. And of course, who are, again, the most crucial elements of this historical process are the people. That's why the exhibition is titled, also the book, The People in 70 Years. In 70 years, what has the people actually achieved? Is there better life? Is the politics better, like that? And this is history, but linked with artworks from our collection. We have a quite comprehensive collection from the first Indonesian modern artist until today, and I asked the curators to select from this collection to make this exhibition.
So thank you very much. Thank you everybody to be there, and I hope maybe next year or in a few times we can have a selection of why not your part of your collection in Paris, and for doing the Asian Art Now, and yeah, I hope it's a taste of Indonesian.
Yeah, actually, this is actually the result of cancelled exhibition. In 2013, I was invited by Mondrian Fonds in Holland and had a meeting with Trouble Museum. They had seen our collection on revolution, and they planned to work together with us to do an exhibition on the revolution time in 2015. But in the meantime, you know, because of the unfavorable economic situation in Holland, you know, Trouble Museum fused with African Museum and the Volkenkunde Museum, so they have to postpone. And also another museum in Holland, in Arnhem, Bronbeek Museum, wanted that also, but also for similar reason it was cancelled. Finally, we do it all ourselves. Yeah. This exhibition.
Okay. Thank you for everybody to be here and for this
Thank you.
wonderful conversation.